Restoring a vineyard in the Netherlands after a long period of abandonment requires a fundamentally different mindset than restoring vineyards in warmer, drier regions. As a specialist working in Northern European viticulture, I can say with certainty that the greatest challenges here are not drought or heat, but excess moisture, compacted soils, fungal pressure, and structural decline of the vines themselves. An abandoned Dutch vineyard is rarely dead, but it is almost always compromised in ways that are not immediately visible. The first and most important responsibility of an expert is diagnosis. In a maritime climate like that of the Netherlands, neglect accelerates biological imbalance. Vines left unmanaged quickly develop excessive vegetative growth, weak wood maturation, and heightened susceptibility to fungal diseases such as downy mildew, powdery mildew, and botrytis. At the same time, soils often clay-based or heavy loam become compacted and anaerobic due to prolonged saturation and lack of organic regulation. Before any pruning or soil work begins, the vineyard must be walked slowly and methodically. An expert observes vine spacing, canopy density, and trunk condition. Living vines often show green cambium beneath the bark even when externally they appear lifeless. However, vines with cracked trunks, hollow wood, or advanced crown rot usually have limited recovery potential. Distinguishing between vines that can be rehabilitated and those that must be replaced is essential, because attempting to save structurally compromised vines often spreads disease and delays overall recovery. Equally important is understanding the vineyard's original layout and intent. Row orientation, trellis systems, and planting density all influence restoration strategy. In many abandoned Dutch vineyards, trellising has collapsed or become entangled with unchecked growth. Wires may be buried, posts weakened, and vine arms tangled beyond recognition. Rushing to untangle or prune without a plan often results in irreversible damage. The first physical intervention is sanitation, not pruning. Deadwood, fallen canes, collapsed trellis materials, and invasive vegetation must be removed carefully. In a humid climate, decaying organic matter near vine trunks creates ideal conditions for fungal pathogens. Clearing the vineyard floor improves airflow immediately, which is one of the most critical factors in disease suppression in Northern Europe. Pruning, when it begins, is deliberately conservative. Unlike warm climates where vines can rebound quickly, Dutch vineyards require caution. Severe pruning of stressed vines often leads to excessive vegetative regrowth and weak fruiting wood. Instead, the expert approach is staged pruning. Initial cuts focus on removing clearly dead or diseased wood while preserving as much healthy structure as possible. This allows the vine to demonstrate its recovery capacity before further shaping decisions are made. Soil rehabilitation is central to vineyard restoration in the Netherlands. Heavy soils that remain waterlogged for long periods suffocate vine roots and disrupt microbial balance. Drainage assessment is therefore non-negotiable. Surface pooling, moss growth, and poor vine vigor often indicate inadequate drainage. Where possible, drainage channels are restored or improved. Not to dry the soil completely, but to restore oxygen exchange. Organic matter is introduced thoughtfully. In wet climates, excessive organic input can worsen anaerobic conditions if not managed properly. Compost is applied in thin layers and combined with soil aeration practices that improve structure. The goal is aggregation, not saturation. A living soil with stable aggregates drains excess water while retaining sufficient moisture during dry periods. As soil oxygen levels improve, vine roots begin to recover. This process is slow, often invisible for an entire season. Experts do not judge success by leaf growth alone. Instead, they monitor shoot lignification, internode spacing, and leaf thickness. These indicators reveal whether the vine is building long-term strength or merely responding superficially. Canopy management becomes a defining practice of restoration in this climate. Excessive foliage traps humidity and promotes disease. However, aggressive leaf removal exposes fruit to rain splash and temperature fluctuations. The balance is delicate. Shoots are positioned to improve airflow while maintaining protective shading. This work is adjusted continuously throughout the season, responding to weather rather than calendar date. Disease pressure remains constant in abandoned vineyards even after initial cleanup. Rather than relying on heavy chemical intervention, experts prioritize prevention through structure and timing, improving airflow, reducing canopy density, and encouraging even ripening reduces susceptibility more effectively than reactive treatments. As the first recovery season progresses, fruit production is considered secondary. Many rehabilitated vines will produce little or no usable fruit initially. This is expected and acceptable. Forcing yield at this stage weakens vines further and delays long-term recovery. The expert's objective is vine survival and structural renewal, not harvest up by the end of the first season. The vineyard often looks uneven. Some vines respond strongly, others weakly, and some not at all. This variability is diagnostic. It reveals underlying soil differences, disease history, and vine age. These observations guide decisions for the second phase of restoration, including selective replanting and trellis restructuring done at this point. The vineyard is no longer abandoned, but it is far from restored. It has entered a fragile transition where expertise matters most. And as the vineyard moves beyond that initial season of stabilization, the second phase of expert restoration begins. And this phase is where long-term success in the Netherlands is truly determined. From professional experience, this is the moment when a vineyard either transitions into a resilient, productive system, or slowly collapses again under renewed pressure from climate and disease. The difference lies in discipline, timing, and a deep respect for how vines behave in cool, humid environments. During the second season, the vines that survived the initial cleanup begin to express their true condition. Bud break in spring becomes an important diagnostic tool. Vines that push evenly, with moderate shoot vigor and balanced internode length, signal recovering root systems and improved carbohydrate reserves. Vines that break weakly, unevenly, or very late often suffer from deeper structural or root damage that may not be economically or biologically viable to correct. At this stage, the expert accepts that replacement is sometimes the most responsible decision, not a failure. Spring pruning adjustments are minimal and deliberate. In Dutch conditions, overpruning weak vines is a common mistake that leads to excessive vegetative growth later in the season, increasing disease pressure. Instead, pruning focuses on preserving established fruiting positions while gradually renewing wood over multiple seasons. The goal is to re-establish a balanced vine architecture that supports airflow and light penetration without forcing rapid change. Soil work in the second year becomes more precise. Initial aeration and organic amendments may have improved surface conditions, but deeper layers often remain compacted, especially in clay-rich soils common across the Netherlands. Experts assess root penetration depth by observing vine vigor patterns and, when necessary, by selective soil profiling. Where compaction persists, targeted subsurface aeration is applied carefully between rows, never directly under vine trunks. To avoid root damage while restoring oxygen flow, cover cropping becomes a critical tool in this phase. Rather than leaving vineyard rows bare, carefully selected cover crops helps regulate moisture, improve soil structure, and suppress aggressive weeds. In Dutch vineyards, cover crops must be chosen with restraint. Excessively vigorous species can compete with vines. In already wet soils, low-growing grasses and legumes are favored, managed through mowing rather than incorporation. Maintaining soil stability without increasing humidity around vine bases. Canopy management intensifies during the second season, but always with caution. Shoots are positioned early to prevent tangling and shading. Lateral growth is controlled selectively, reducing density without stripping foliage. In a high humidity climate, the objective is to create continuous air corridors through the canopy, allowing wind to move freely and leaves to dry quickly after rainfall. This alone can reduce fungal pressure more effectively than many chemical interventions. Disease management remains a constant concern. Downy mildew, powdery mildew, and botrytis thrive in neglected Dutch vineyards. Rather than reacting after symptoms appear, expert restoration relies on anticipation, monitoring weather patterns, leaf wetness duration, and vine growth stages. Informs timing of interventions. Structural prevention always comes first, with treatments used only to support, not replace. Good vineyard design. During this phase, fruit production may begin to return on some vines, but expectations remain conservative. Clusters are often small and uneven, reflecting the vine's ongoing recovery. Professionals resist the temptation to carry a full crop too early. Crop thinning may be applied selectively to prevent overloading recovering vines. prioritizing long-term wood maturation and root health over immediate yield. As summer progresses, vine behavior becomes more predictable. Shoot growth stabilizes, leaf texture thickens, and lignification improves toward late summer. These changes indicate that the vine is rebuilding internal reserves. Experts monitor this closely, because proper wood maturation is essential for winter survival in northern Europe. Vines that fail to harden adequately remain vulnerable to frost damage, which can undo years of restoration effort in a single season. Order management focuses on preparing vines for winter rather than maximizing late-season ripening, and leaf removal is minimal, ensuring sufficient photosynthetic capacity for reserve accumulation. Irrigation, if present at all, is reduced early, encouraging natural dormancy processes. Cover crops are managed to prevent excessive moisture retention near trunks as temperatures drop. Winter pruning decisions are informed by the entire season's observations. Vines that demonstrated consistent growth and proper wood maturation are pruned conservatively to maintain balance. Vines that struggled may be left with additional buds as insurance, allowing the vine to regulate itself in spring. This adaptive approach reflects professional understanding that rigid pruning formulas do not work in recovering vineyards. By the end of the second year, the vineyard begins to show cohesion. While variability remains, the system functions more evenly, soil drains more predictably, vines respond consistently to management, and disease pressure becomes manageable rather than overwhelming. This does not mean the vineyard is restored, but it means it is no longer fragile. The expert now shifts focus from recovery to refinement. Trellis systems are evaluated and repaired permanently. Row spacing is reassessed in relation to machinery. Access and airflow decisions are made about whether certain blocks should be replanted entirely to improve uniformity and long-term viability. Emotionally, this stage requires patience and confidence. Results are visible but incomplete. Many vineyards fail here because caretakers lose discipline, either relaxing standards too early or pushing vines too hard for yield. Professional restoration demands restraint, guided by long-term vision rather than short-term reward. At this point, the vineyard has crossed a threshold. It is no longer defined by abandonment, but by potential. The coming seasons will determine whether that potential is realized fully. And as the vineyard enters this third phase of expert-led restoration, the work becomes less about correcting obvious problems and more about embedding permanence into the system. From a professional perspective, this is the phase where experience, restraint, and long-term vision matter more than technical intervention. The vineyard is no longer fragile, but it is still impressionable. Decisions made now will shape its performance for decades. By the third season, vine behavior has become far more informative. Bud break timing across the vineyard reveals which vines have rebuilt adequate carbohydrate reserves and which remain marginal. Uniform bud break indicates that root systems, soil, oxygen levels, and nutrient cycling are finally functioning in harmony. Where bud break remains uneven, experts investigate underlying causes rather than treating symptoms. Often, these differences trace back to subtle soil variability, historical waterlogging, or root damage that predates abandonment. Pruning during this phase is guided by continuity rather than correction. The objective is to lock in a stable vine architecture that can be maintained with minimal stress year after year. In the Dutch climate, this usually means avoiding excessive spur density and prioritizing clear, well-spaced fruiting zones that allow rapid drying after rainfall. Each pruning decision considers airflow first, yield second, and vine longevity above all. Soil management now shifts from recovery to maintenance. The soil no longer needs aggressive intervention, but it does require protection. Cover crops are refined, with mixtures adjusted based on observed competition and moisture retention. In wetter sites, covers are managed aggressively to prevent excessive transpiration stress on vines during cooler summers. In lighter soils, cover crops are allowed to persist longer, improving structure and microbial diversity. These adjustments are subtle but cumulative, reflecting a deep understanding of site-specific behavior. Water management remains one of the defining challenges in Dutch viticulture. Even in restored vineyards, excess moisture can return quickly. During wet years, experts monitor soil saturation closely and adjust traffic patterns to prevent compaction during vulnerable periods. Machinery access is restricted when soils are saturated. Even if this delays certain operations, Preserving soil structure always outweighs short-term convenience. Canopy management during this phase becomes anticipatory rather than reactive. Shoots are positioned early, before rapid growth creates congestion. Lateral growth is controlled strategically, removing only what threatens airflow. Leaf removal around clusters is minimal and targeted, sufficient to reduce humidity without exposing fruit to prolonged wetness or temperature stress. This nuanced balance is essential in a climate where fungal pressure is constant. Disease pressure, while reduced compared to the abandoned state, never disappears entirely. Professionals accept this reality and manage accordingly. Monitoring becomes routine and disciplined. Decisions are informed by weather data, vine phenology, and historical disease patterns. Interventions, when used, are precisely timed and integrated into a broader strategy that prioritizes prevention through structure and airflow. Fruit quality during this phase begins to reflect the vineyard's recovery. Sugar accumulation becomes more consistent, acids stabilize, and flavor development improves. However, experts resist the temptation to push ripeness aggressively. In the Netherlands, late-season rain and cool temperatures can quickly compromise fruit integrity. Harvest decisions are therefore guided by balance, rather than maximum potential alcohol or sugar levels. Yield management remains conservative. Even when vines appear capable of carrying more fruit, professionals often limit crop load intentionally. This decision supports continued root development, wood maturation, and long-term resilience. A restored vineyard that produces moderate, reliable yields is far more valuable than one that peaks briefly before declining again as seasons pass. The vineyard begins to exhibit minor stresses no longer trigger cascading problems. Disease outbreaks remain localized rather than systemic. Soil responds predictably to rainfall. Vines recover quickly from pruning and canopy adjustments. These signs indicate that the vineyard has moved beyond restoration into true functionality at this stage. Experts also evaluate the human systems around the vineyard. Maintenance schedules are simplified. Practices that require constant intervention are redesigned or eliminated. The goal is to ensure that the vineyard can remain healthy even during periods of reduced attention, preventing future abandonment from causing severe damage again. Strategic replanting may occur during this phase. Vines that consistently underperform, despite restoration efforts, are removed and replaced. New plantings benefit from improved soil conditions and refined trellis systems, establishing quickly and evenly. Over time, this selective renewal increases uniformity and reduces management complexity. Winter management becomes increasingly important as the vineyard matures. Proper dormancy, protection from frost damage, and careful pruning timing ensure that gains made during the growing season are preserved. Experts avoid late pruning that stimulates premature bud break, a critical consideration in Northern Europe, where spring frost risk remains high. By the end of this phase, the vineyard no longer carries the structural or biological markers of abandonment. Its challenges are those of any actively managed Dutch vineyard, not those of recovery. The soil functions as a living system, vines express balanced growth, and disease pressure is manageable rather than overwhelming. From a professional standpoint, this is the moment when restoration can be considered successful, not because the vineyard is perfect, but because it is resilient. It can withstand weather variability, modest management errors, and seasonal pressures without systemic failure. Looking back, the journey from abandonment to functionality reveals a consistent truth. Restoration is not achieved through dramatic intervention, but through disciplined observation, restrained action, and respect for the specific realities of climate and soil. In the Netherlands, where moisture and disease pressure define these principles are not optional. They are the foundation of survival. The vineyard now stands not as a repaired system, but as a renewed one. Its future depends not on extraordinary effort, but on steady stewardship guided by experience.